artist guide to editing the editor, automation, validation, and custom tools, and even more. We're going to be covering a lot of presentation content in this presentation. My name is Jack Condon. I'm a solution architect for Epic. I work out of Melbourne. And this is a topic that I'm really excited to cover. The whole idea of this talk is that tools are becoming incredibly accessible, and that's really exciting for me because I've always been attracted to the idea that we can automate a lot of this work and make things easier. And I think that comes from just the amount of mundane work that I've had to do in my life, right? And I think that everyone who's come to this probably feels the same way. So we're in the right group. So let's kick it off. Let's start with why. I think we all know why, but let's just go over what I think. Why? Because you can, right? That's not a very good reason by itself, but the point is that there's been all this development effort to essentially allow everyone, designers, artists, producers, to make their own tools as simply as possible that are powerful and that let you prototype and actually deal with the kind of problems that you're facing as an individual. So this hasn't come from nowhere. This is intentional, and it's something that we should all be taking advantage of. The other reason, of course, is tools and automation mean faster turnarounds, means that you have better iteration, means that you get to focus on being creative. I think there's this argument that you always need to sum up is the tool I'm making going to take more time than just brute forcing the problem, right? And that's an equation you always have to think about. But what I would say as we go through this presentation is that with these new tools, being aware of the type of things that you can do, that's the only way that you can shift that equation and start using more automation, right? It's through knowing. So that's why we're all here. And finally, contested point, but I do not think verbalizing is always the best form of communication with the team member, right? I actually think that we can have other forms of communication as a team, and one of them is doing stuff by example. So you're an artist, you want a tool, you go ask a programmer, they're like, yep, here it is, and you're like, oh, it's not quite right, because it's hard to explain this stuff, right? That programmer's now on another ticket, they're gone, you're not seeing them again, that's just how things work, we know it is, right? You're like, how do I iterate it in this? Doesn't really do what I want it to. Well, if you're able to prototype your own tools, worst case scenario is that you can give that to a programmer. They've got the best design document that you could ever hand over to make that tool, right? Best case scenario is it works, and then you can iterate on it yourself and make it amazing. So they're my 3 reasons. Agenda, we're only covering 2 things really, but a lot of topics. So we're going to burn through a lot of different things. Which kind of means don't worry. I want this presentation to show you how to do things. That's very ambitious. So it's not a presentation where I'm going through features. We're going to dive into some code examples as well. If you don't follow them, that's because we're doing 50 different things. And that's okay. Just get a sense of it, right? That's the goal here. So let's start with customizing the editor. And we're going to start with something very simple that I hope everyone's across, but of course it's adding a button to your details panel. So basically, as long as you have a function on an actor with call an editor, voila, we have a button, right? And why is this useful? Well, we often have a lot of stuff on construction, right? For procedural art stuff. In this case, we've got this duckboarding. And having that details button can be really useful when you don't want that update on the editor. For example, I might have a second duckboarding that could preview what I'm about to do before I set, or other tools like that. In fact, there's heaps of scenarios where you don't want everything on your construction script. And so this is a really good one to start with. But of course, the other big and easy win for productivity is editor utility widgets. And so these empower you to make your own dashes constructed through UMG. UMG is extremely user-friendly. This is actually a tool that Andy Blondin made during the motion design beta. And it's been thrown together what looks like pretty quickly without being too critical. And that's great. This was the perfect example. It's a tool that allows you to kind of switch your camera, change focus, change lens, and all that stuff is right there in the details panel. But we know that there's a lot of stuff in there, right? So having this quick select is kind of the perfect tool. And so when I started diving into Motion Designer, I found this in some deep folder. And when I turned it on, I couldn't stop using it, right? And so I thought this is perfect as an example of people making content. But I wanted to throw up, rather than go through all of it, because I think we're pretty aware of UMG and kind of its capacities, I wanted to show you my favorites. So let's go through Jack's favorite widgets that are cool. The first one we're going to talk about is single property view. We're going to say why we like this and why we don't. But in this mock-up example, you're going to see this is not user-facing UI. This is an example I made a while ago, which would be kind of a designer-friendly way of looking at items in a large RPG, right? Which is something that you can do with Edit to Utility Widgets, right? And so over here, I've got this single property view. They're really easy to set up. This allows me to select a data asset that would then propagate the rest of this information. As you can see, it's got all the trimmings you would expect. I can drop it in the editor, and then I just tell it the property's name that it's pointing to. Now, the only gotcha is with these is you need to give it a context. So what I mean by that is that, okay, you've referenced a property, but where is that property? Could be on any actor or anything. I find a common design pattern that I use when I'm making these widgets is using self, because that creates a really easy way to inject that widget with information. So that's a very normal thing that I do. They can be used in more clever ways, of course. However, single property view only supports a few types and is kind of limited. So a great way around this, I guess a hack, is to use a details panel widget. So you can see here that I'm representing a struct just before, and this struct has some metadata, it's got checkboxes, it's a bit fancy, and single property view will not support this, right? It just can't, it doesn't know how. But if I use a details property view, it will render that the same way we see it in the details panel. So that's really useful. And it might be the right choice even if you're dealing with only one property, right? So do consider that. But what's cool is we can add stuff to it really easy. So set one up, we can pass in a category instead of a property name if we like, and then I can just move variables into that category, and voila, they're gonna update, we've got them, and we can change them. And so one of the use cases for this is if you've got an Edit to widget, it's a good way to reference actors in the scene because you can get that context now. And it even comes, obviously, with all those trimmings like eyedropper tool and whatever else. So Object Mixer is sort of a parent to Light Mixer, if you've ever used that tool. It allows you to create filters that will create a list of actors in the scene and display properties that you tell it to. So in this case, I'm using it to art direct these fog volumes. And one of its really useful features is that it has categories. So in this case, I've got background, foreground, and midground, and I can jump between those. And you can select actors together or individually and change them all together. So this is a really great way to kind of art direct at mass, right? And do things very quickly. And you can drop them straight into a widget. They can also be accessed through the Light Mixer tool, which people don't know about. You can change the filter, which is why I say they're kind of the parent of. So to get them working, you just need to provide a filter class. You can make a filter class just by finding it in miscellaneous. It's as easy as that. We can also create really cute little viewports in our widgets. And this is a useful alternative to create like different views of your map, or you could make like a top-down view if you needed that, maybe like a heat map of data, I don't know. But in this case, we're just using it to preview a little item mesh, just to make our little UI here a bit cuter. Once again, that's not a user-facing tool. I'd probably do a lot more, but this is a very simple example. All I'm doing is basically these viewports can act like little pocket dimensions. They're UWorlds, right? And we can spawn things in them. So in this case, I'm spawning the item. It has a rotator component, and I've got a directional line. Simple as that, right? And they respond like other widgets. In this case, I've just got it set up in my hierarchy, and I've got a left and right button set up to add some spin, a bit of UX, bad UX, it's fine. Here's a more complex example I didn't make that took longer than what I did, but is actually really cool to show it off. So here it's a view of the landscape, and this is part of the new landscape tools that have come in, and you're able to draw the shape of the mountain, right? And then it's going to reflect in the mountain itself. Pretty cool. So Here's one I didn't prepare earlier. Use a toolbox plugin. So editor utility widgets come with this kind of cognitive overhead. And sometimes what we want is something really simple and easy to use. We just want a set of buttons. And that's where use a toolbox plugin comes in. It's been experimental since 5.2, and it's a really great way to provide features to artists. So in this example, I'd made that camera tool that we looked at before, and I decided that I was going to hand it over as a bit of a present. And you can see me doing operations like I'm switching the camera. It's got an autofocus feature, which ended up being really fun that I'll go into. And it's got this really professional layout, but it did not take me long. So I can be like, look at this amazing tool, but I didn't earn that cred, you know? So creating them is super fast and flexible. Not as flexible as an editor utility widget though, right? That's that cognitive overhead. We just drag our tasks into the categories, and from there we can customize icon, names, and importantly, parameters that are going to the functions they're executing, so you can get a lot of reusability out of them. We can access them by going to Windows Windows User Toolbox, and we're good to go. But you can do heaps of cool stuff with them. So you can change their layout, and we've got a few there, but you can add your own. Here's an example of them set up as like a horizontal bar. You can also have them pull out as a tab, so that's what that looks like. It's just a checkbox. Unreal Talk, you get to say it's just a checkbox multiple times. I love that view. I don't like this view, but it's there, so maybe you like it, which is view in drawer. And what that does is we've got it down here now. And, you know, maybe that's good for you. Point is, you've got so many options, right? You're getting a lot of reuse out of this tool. So producing your icons is really easy, much easier than any kind of icon thing I've dealt with. It's got this asset called an icon tracker. And so basically we select a path to our PNG folder, and it automatically propagates all the icons to use for us, right? Now, there is a gotcha here that definitely got me, so I'm going to share it with you, is that the path is relative to where the icon tracker lives in your project. So if it is in a plugin folder, the PNG path will be relative to the root directory of that plugin folder. Or if it's in a project, root directory of the project, which is actually a really cool feature because they can move together. But also you need to know about it, so now you know. And you can make your own tasks in Blueprint or C++, so we can just create a new command here. We override command. It's as easy as that. We can give it some class defaults if we want to be really professional. We can give it a name, a little tooltip, all that kind of nice stuff. And we can give it an icon, right? But what I really love about these is that you can assign a hotkey to them, right? And so that hotkey is just active and ready to go. And that's super powerful for all sorts of actions. So I'll show you a video. I set up autofocus. It's really simple. It fires a ray, hits something, changes the camera's focus. If I select something, it will set the focus to that. It's kind of advanced, I would say. Pretty cool. But you know, this is something like when you're moving a camera, it's not so good to change context and come over here with the mouse, blah, blah, blah. So this is a great action that you can just fire on command from keys. You can make your own buttons. Have you ever wanted to make a button in the editor without Python or C++ or anything like that? Well, you can. I will say it's slightly clunky to set up, but it is not very hard. So we'll walk through it together. This is really powerful to really get UI where you need it. All you need to do is you make an editor utility, and then you want to create a editor utility tools menu. That's the class you want to use. From there, we need to copy a reference to the area we want to inject our button. So to do this, we have an editor mode called menu editing, and it'll place little cogs everywhere. And these little cogs represent places that you can inject your UI. So it's very graphical in that way and quite cool. To enable this, if you don't see it down here, you need to add in this setting into your default engine per project user settings.ini. I wish that's the only time I had to say that in this presentation, but I think the count is at like 4, and it's a horrible thing to say out loud. So maybe next time I'll just point. From there, we just copy references from the pop-up after selecting our little cog, and we put it into where we want to see it. Simple. Now we need a way to actually activate it, put it in the UI. To do this, you can make a run command, call an editor, and then when you right-click and click run, we have our new little icon. It's pretty cool. But now it's a little cog, which is a bit whatever. I wanted to give some love to this plugin called the Slate Icon Browser. And there are many ways to find icons in your resources. I think this is the most artist-friendly and easiest way, okay? That's why I'm promoting it. It's really cool. Basically, we can do a search for something that we're after. We get its address. We put the address where the address lives, which is the style name. And voila. We have tooltips icon. We're very professional. And when we click it, and we click run, there it is. Okay, but you don't want to have to do that. Well, you can actually get editor scripts to run at startup, which is quite powerful. You just add this to your blah, 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 over there, and you're good to go. Okay, this one's for the art directors in the room who are sick of programmers choosing a random color red when they've picked out a very specific hex value that needs to be used. I'm sorry, I'm trying to make up for past sins, right? The color picker actually has templates and colors that you can put in there. And that's great. And a lot of people, you probably know about that. But these don't share by default. So I wanted to give you a quick tip on how you can share that on your source control. To do that, blah, 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 again. All you need to do is copy those values under color theme and you're good to go. That will now be, you can push that to source control, etc. And then that way, an art director can set those values early and not have horrible people like me messing with their stuff. So geometry toolsets are extremely powerful. I don't have time to cover any of it in truth. I'll show you one example, but I'm really just trying to inspire you to check out all the things you can do. The reason it's powerful is most of the things you can see in the editor, you can do with code, and we'll cover that in a minute. But let's start with a simple example, which I just go into modeling mode. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a bake in Engine. So this is really cool that we can bake in Engine. I feel like we're living in some crazy reality, but it's very exciting. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to bake the curvature maps into the vertex of the mesh. That's really useful in Nanite. I think we've all seen this technique, right? Your meshes are typically dense enough to actually hold decent information. So with the curvature map, I could say where the snow's building up or where it's all gritty or whatever curvature map thing I want to do. And the vertexes kind of hold up for most effects. Maybe not everything, but it's pretty cool. But, I can do all of this in this panel, and you can see previews. It's very sophisticated, very cool tool. I also want to point out scriptable tools. So when they came out, I think Chris made these 3 examples that I've stolen wholesale. And basically there's 3 different vibes to this. This is the drag tool. But essentially it allows you to drag your mouse, generates points, and then we're putting down like a spline mesh. There's also click tools. So in this one, we click, and then we click somewhere else and spotlight's changing, right? Use your imagination. These are very simple use cases, but very powerful to click. But the really cool thing is that if you don't want to drag or click, you can spawn in 3D gizmos into the scene that do things, right? So you can put in like a rotator transform or like a weird cube thing, like in this example. What do you want? We got it. We got you covered. So that's incredibly powerful, and they're very, very exciting to use. So speaking of scriptable tools, I want to move away from sort of editor UI for a moment, and we'll start talking about scripting and automation. In this first example, I'm going to point out that this rock has no UVs. That's perfect for this project, but this rock actually came to me last night and said, I really feel like I'm missing out on UVs. I want to know what that's like. So I said, I've got you sorted. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make an asset action utility, and this is not how fast I actually work. I've used the technology of video editing. But I want to give it a filter class, so I'm saying this only works on static meshes, and I'm just going to make a function that's going to, I'll go through this later. I think it's useful that you see how we actually work with the procedural mesh tools. But for now, I just want to show you the kind of result. Wow, the rock's no longer missing out. So to do this, let's step through how I did this. First thing I want to do is make an editor function library. This is really useful for common things that I might want to reuse for editor functions, meaning that they're not runtime, okay? And we're going to go ahead and I'm going to explain how I did the auto UV. So the first thing that we need to do is, if I'm using the modeling tools, I'm doing it to a mesh in the world, right? But I don't want to do that with script. I don't want it in the world. So I need to create a pocket dimension where I'm going to create a mesh that we'll never see and we'll manipulate it and do things there, right? How do I make a pocket dimension? We can do that with create dynamic mesh pool. And then we request a mesh. We bring a mesh into existence like a ball of clay to shape. And then after that, we grab the static mesh that we're looking at. We shape our ball of clay to look like that one, but it's an imposter. After that, we run this UV function. And then we save back our new procedural mesh over our static mesh we were looking at. We're going to save it there. We might want to check it out and do some other useful things. And finally, we close the pocket dimension. We release the memory that is inside of there, okay? Which is going to be really important if you're doing lots of assets. So, we have that. We have a function. Cool. How do we do the next part? Well, if we make a custom event and then call an editor, this is inside of our asset editor that we made before, we can go ahead and put in the function. So all we're doing is getting the selected assets and running our function we made. As my little blue square is trying to tell you all. Let's run it. Let's take these perfectly UV'd objects and break them for fun. So what this is doing is a different way of dealing with it. You'll see these toast pop-ups, and these are not standard, right? This is a bit fancy. What these are is editor task utilities. These allow you to execute asynchronous code with these little toast pop-ups that you feel pretty professional when you use them, I think. So first, to kick these off, we want to fire them from something else, like a task or something like that. It could be an editor utility. You know, we need to create them, register them, and then they execute. So in this case, rather than this function just being executed here, I would replace this with creating the task and firing it off. Does that make sense? So to make them, we make an editor utility and we use an editor utility task. Simple as that. Then we're going to override begin execute, and here we're setting the toast notifications kind of text. And over here we're running our function. Now I'm using expose on spawn on this parameter, and that's going to help me when I create this task to execute, right? I need to tell it when it finishes. This is useful. But if you don't do that, you're going to have a big problem because it's never going to finish. It means that I could do like a REST API command, right? Or I could do a really long and laborious thing, and I'm telling Unreal when that's finished, which is really quite useful. So we just create it with construct. You'll see that I've got the static mesh reference that I exposed before. That's a nice way to work. And then I register and execute task on the editor utility subsystem. Done. Pretty easy. So this is working now, as you can see. But another way to work with this is, in this example, I'm passing the array of things I want to pass to the task, and then it's going through and doing them one by one, which is just another execution of the same thing, but you might want to work that way for some things. So transactions are really important when you're doing scripting. They allow you to add operations to Unreal's history, so they work with Control-Z. But they're also critical if you're using multi-user editor, because multi-user editor actually doesn't send over all the data, it's sending over transactions. So if you want that to persist on your multi-user session, you must use these. The other thing is they're really easy. You just go begin transaction, give it some text, bit of context. We tell it when an object is being transacted, something's happened to it, it's going to mark it as dirty for us, it's cool. And then we tell it when it ends. That's it. So there's really no excuse not to add this into your workflows, right? It's just going to make things a lot better. And here it is again. I'm proving it works for some reason, just in case you don't believe me. They're all dirty, Control-Z, and they're not. Wow. Professional. Very cool. The next thing I want to talk about is going to be content pipelines. So I'm very excited to talk about this. There will be areas where it gets a bit technical. We're going to come back with examples. Just bear with me. I said this is for artists, and I haven't lied to you, but there's some aspects of Interchange and kind of things that are going on that get a little bit more complicated. The goal is to walk through it slowly enough that you get the concepts, but even if you don't, I'll point out one thing that everyone can do that's really powerful, so there'll definitely be takeaways for everyone. So speaking of pipelines, we have to talk about, like, you want to consider pipelines obviously when you're working with large teams or large amounts of assets. And yeah, we need to think about this. A lot of work we're going to do in Unreal is going to be done outside of Unreal. You know, that's a reality. So considering this is going to be very important. Ideally, a strong pipeline can enforce standards, minimize repetitive tasks, reduce onboarding, which is always lovely, allow you to mass re-import data if you need to, and work non-destructively and predictively. Maybe your pipeline doesn't do all of that, but that's ideal. So before I get too stuck into stuff, can I just point out relative import paths? Because a lot of people don't know about these. And so this is really great where you have your U project and then maybe your source assets somewhere else, but the relative path is always going to be the same between them, rather than the absolute path where you've got like D drive / Dave's secret folder / whatever, right? And so you see I re-imported this and now I've got a relative path from the U project. So we can just go to editor settings, miscellaneous, and then we'll be able to set the relative path from there. Really, really powerful stuff. Pipeline integration. Unreal can handle a lot of formats. That's very good. You've probably seen this slide if you've been following our content pipelines. This was something we produced when Datasmith was all the rage. Datasmith's still very cool, but it's old. What about the new way? What about Interchange? So what is Interchange? Why are we excited? Well, basically, it's changed things a little bit. Not too much has changed. We still have Datasmith, right? We still have all these assets, but now they're going through a common framework that will then go into Unreal, okay? So what makes it different? Well, as you can see, it's aiming to be file format agnostic, okay? But that doesn't mean it supports all file formats out of the box today. It means that we can add them in a way that we get to reuse heaps of code. It's very efficient, okay? And it's going to be efficient for you as well. It's also asynchronous, so this is huge performance boost if you are working with like scene formats and you have a lot of assets and you want to not hate life, get the most out of your hardware. But this is what I'm most excited about. It's really customizable, and that's what we're going to focus on today. We're talking about how we can get the most out of this, but it's also runtime, okay? Which is relevant to maybe 2 people in the room, maybe 3, but you can be excited about that too. So it means you'll get the same kind of pipeline for runtime, yes, for runtime as you would when you import from the editor, right? So that's going to be important as well. So this is what it looks like. Before I get stuck in, I just wanted to show you it, give you a smell, give you a sense of it. It looks similar to FBX import, right? But there's a few other bits going on. So it's a more complicated importer. Why do you care? Because you can hack it to do cool stuff. But before we get there, and I promise you the payoff is worth it, we need to go through some interchange theory, okay? And I just want to call out the key terms because there's a lot of nouns in here that we probably need to define. And I apologize in advance for the sheer amount of times I'm about to say the word pipeline. That's unavoidable. So a pipeline always begins, Interchange always begins with the translator. This is responsible for turning whatever format we're using, like GLTF for example, into a generic interchange format. And that's how it's file agnostic, right? The first step we do is change it into this other language. And that other language is nodes. It's just a bunch of nodes. So a node could be a texture, a material attribute, could be a mesh, could be an offset, right? Could be anything that it needs to be. Once we have these nodes, we feed them into a pipeline stack. Now, these are customizable, but initially they're set up in a way that probably makes sense. We've got assets, scenes, materials, and textures. That should make up the bulk of a lot of things. But you can change them, and you can be more specific, and I'll get into that later. Now, each pipeline stack has pipelines in it, and that's an ordered array. It's very important that we consider it an ordered array. And each pipeline can also have pipelines in it. So your pipeline can live in a pipeline stack. An example of this, to demystify it a little bit, is say our asset pipeline, which, what is an asset, right? Well, we're gonna need a bunch of pipelines. We're gonna need a texture pipeline or a texture pipeline, typo, just seen it. A material pipeline, we're gonna need a static mesh pipeline or whatever. We're gonna need all those things within it. And the main thing that these pipelines will probably do is that they will create factories. Now, the factories are responsible for ultimately creating U assets, okay? But what's cool is that these factories that are made are actually nodes as well, put into the same stack. And why is that meaningful? It means one pipeline can create the nodes, then another pipeline can hack them before it's done. And that lets you reuse code really effectively. And I'll show some examples. So this is the Interchange import window. I just wanted to point out all the things we've just learned to validate our noun learning. There's a pipeline stack where we can select there. These are the pipelines in our pipeline stack. And then here we have a details panel, which is the details of each individual pipeline, which is super cool. All right, enough theory. I think we've got it. Let's move on to some cool stuff. So, first thing that I think is really powerful is we can change the defaults of an import pipeline. And this is really good because as advanced users, we open FBX and we're like, yeah, whatever, we do what we need to do and we move on. I rarely look at all the options today, right? But if you're new to this ecosystem, you're gonna freak out. There's a lot of stuff in there, right? And so how can we deal with that? Well, you'll see here that I create a pipeline asset, right? And I'm able to set up defaults like, oh, always use this path, or always use this name, or always use this material, whatever, right? And I can even hide them, and that's really powerful. But in 5.4, we made that even better. So we've got this basic layout mode, which, like, I don't know, it might be a bit harsh to tell a team member, oh, just, you're basic, use that. But it's useful, right? And so in basic mode, we can actually say what's visible again, and sort of get rid of clutter. And so here, in basic mode, all I can do is change the parent material. Right, that could be a good application. We can also do different imports by type. So this is our Interchange project settings, and we'll see how customizable this is. These are all our different pipeline stacks, but I can create more, right? An example could be like asset foliage, and then I could have follow-up actions for that foliage asset or whatever, right? Let's just dive into one of them. This is the default asset pipeline. You can see here we're running the default asset pipeline. It's going to do what we need it to. Pretty simple. But what's going on here? Per translator pipelines, this is cool. So basically, if we detect that we're using a GLTF translator, then we can run different stuff. So we can start overriding what is an asset in certain contexts. Now, the takeaway there is that it's very customizable, so it's probably going to work in your projects in some bizarre way, right? It's made to be built upon. Speaking of building, how do you build your own pipelines? Well, pretty simple. We can make them in Python Blueprint or C++, and then we just add them to the pipeline stack. So I'm just going to bash out some code, which is going to tick sRGB on a texture with base color. It's kind of a dumb example, right? Because Unreal does a really good job of this, but it's also very simple, right? So trying to transfer lessons here. So here I'm just checking if it has the name base color, and if it does, we turn that on, right? Nothing too advanced. But I've got this parameter here, and watch what that does. I'm gonna add it to all the pipeline stacks that deal with textures. It's all of them. And I am going to override one of these functions. So what's cool about this is that each pipeline has multiple places that it can do a thing, right? And so this one here, execute post factory, is the one that I want you to focus on to get started, right? That means after I've imported and I've created the U asset, all the nodes are gone now, I've created the U asset, do something to that U asset. Right? That's really useful out of the gate. And so in this case, we're going to override that. We've got a reference to the created asset. And I'm going to check this little bool that I made. And there we go. Run our little function. Now, that bool is going to pop up in the pipeline's details. So it's as simple as that. We can start adding user parameters. Really powerful. Scripting on import. Here we've got that perfect camera again, and I'm not done messing with it, so let's change its UVs again. And I'm going to do this on import. It's the same process, right? Where I've got a little bool, and then I'm running our gen UV function. But I wanted to show that you can start playing with Interchange as a kind of production tool as well, in some cases. All right. I've always loved Datasmith for one specific reason. There are others, but my love is in Visual Data Prep. Visual Data Prep, a lot of people don't know about because I haven't had to deal with Datasmith, and it's kind of was only part of that. And it's this awesome tool that allows you to create recipes in a visual format that can basically do all sorts of stuff. Like you can apply material instances, you can simplify geometry, you can apply UVs. It's all in this node format. And as well, it can run headerlessly. So like you could have a team just put files in a folder. It could kick up, generate U assets, and then put you on your source control. So very powerful stuff, right? But in 5.4, we can use Interchange as an import option. So it's not just Datasmith files. So now we could make it work on other scene files like GLTF, right? And the principles are pretty basic. We've got selection nodes, which is like selecting what we want to do a thing on. We've got operator nodes, which do a thing. And we've got selection transform nodes, which kind of work like a filter, but they can also add to the current selection as well. We can also make our own. It's really expandable, right? Which is really powerful. So I want to show a quick demo where, I think we had that demo, right? Did that video play? Can we please just stop the presentation, bring it back up? This is a PowerPoint thing. I know this because all my PowerPoints have too many videos, and eventually it just goes, nah, Jack, we're done, come on. You don't need to close it, but that will also work. That's like the surefire way. And we'll see if this video plays now. Well, either way, we've got Interchange file importer here. Here we go. And so I'm selecting a GLTF file. You'll see I've got filter by vertex count. I'm then going to create a proxy mesh, which is going to merge those meshes together. I'm then going to set the LOD group and actually auto-generate LODs, okay? And so we're going to do that to our lovely camera, which is separated as two meshes with offsets. And there we go. We've got our camera. It's done it. And I'm going to give it a little spin to present it to the world. Material factory nodes. This is, we're getting a little bit more advanced. But this is really powerful. This is a very awesome way of working to manipulate node data itself before our factories do something, okay? And I want to walk to you, use a case study for this. We're going to look at GLTF and how it works, okay? So the GLTF pipeline is just applying more appropriate materials for the GLTF file format and inserting some attributes. That's kind of the TLDR on that. So skipping forward a bit, we're re-importing a scene file. Now Unreal actually creates this little thing here, this scene import, because a scene file is a collection of assets, so how do you re-import that? Like, ugh. It creates this little dummy that you can right-click and re-import, which is really cool. But anyway, whatever. That's another feature. But you can see we've got 3 pipelines to deal with this. So let's have a look at them. The first one obviously makes all our factories to create our assets. This second one is dealing with the fact it's a scene file, so it needs to place stuff in the world. This third one's what I wanted to focus on. We've got one parameter, use material instance libraries, okay? And so all it wants to do is change out to materials that have more of a GLTF flavor. So that's defined in a uDeveloper settings class, which basically is a class that lets you put in variables into your developer settings, very useful. And we just want to do these switches. Now, the reason I'm showing you this is probably something that you want to do as a studio, right? Change out material parents based on things. That's pretty normal. Let's run it through what we learned before. So our translator is obviously going to be using the GLTF translator, and we also learned that that means we're going to use a different pipeline stack. We're going to generate nodes, the generic format. Then we're going to run it through the asset pipeline. This is going to create the factories that are going to create those assets, right? Finally, it's going to run through the GLTF pipe, which is going to grab those factory nodes before they execute and change out the material parent. Finally, we get our U assets. And so why is this cool? It means implementing this only took 2 bespoke components. the translator, and a thing at the end that just hacks it into what we want. See how we're reusing all that material? I want to show you a really simple blueprint example of editing a factory node. So you'll see that we're running scripted execute pipeline instead of post factory. Here we're getting all the nodes that are material instance nodes. We're just getting their names, their actual reference, casting them, and then we're using set custom parent. And I've got that as exposed as a parameter over here, so that obviously appears for us. And like that, I've turned all my meshes into holograms. Not very good, but very simple example. So other cool use cases, obviously setting correct material instances really takes a lot of guesswork out of your art pipeline, especially when you get very bespoke on VFX or whatever. You could be performing geometry modifications. You could create derived assets. So what I mean by that is, just say you've got a set of armor that you import, right? And you tick armor. You could go ahead and also do post steps like generate a data class, which will now register the asset registry, and now it's in your inventory, right? You can go through and do those kind of things. And I also think that I will start seeing some PCG examples for assemblies, like importing a GLTF file. Well, it just generates the assembly automatically, right? So we can, all that kind of stuff. So there's a lot of cool stuff. Do you want my bad joke? I'll do it anyway, you have no choice. Everyone's talking about the metaverse, but what do they think about metadata? I don't know why I put that in there. Thank you. So metadata and the asset registry, I wanted to clear something up because I gave a talk a while ago and people came to me with a bit of confusion around asset metadata versus the asset registry. Now both are actually about metadata. You can see how it would be normal to be confused. The asset registry is metadata about assets, but you should think about them like a different data source, okay? So asset metadata is actually saved in the U asset. So just like any other property or variable. And it can be set in the editor or imported from DCC tools, which is why they're quite cool. But because asset metadata is saved to the U asset, it means that the asset's got to be fully loaded in order to read that data, and we need to dirty it to change that data as well. So here's a quick example of setting metadata in some other applications. And then you import it. There it is in Unreal, proving this stuff works. I don't know why. Here's an example of getting the metadata. Very simple. You just provide a fname, and we can set metadata in the editor as well. And I want to show you a pipeline with Interchange that I'm setting metadata and import. Now, what's this data doing? I'm setting an artist name and a status of an asset, right? Simple asset tracking. Then it appears in this Kanban that I made with an Editor Utility Widget. I don't know if you'd want to track this kind of stuff in Engine, but I guess you could. So, there it is. How did I do this? Well, it's really simple. On post factory, which we learn about, I'm just running add asset to Kanban, which is setting some metadata. Good, done, very easy. Once it's imported, we can always see metadata is set in the editor. This is really useful for debugging by going to show metadata. You can see that there. So with Interchange, it's runtime as well as editor, okay? And setting metadata and getting and a bunch of other editor functions are editor only, means no runtime, right? We've got a problem. And so what I did for this demo in 5.4 was I wrote some C++ in a little wrapper and I fixed it. And you can do that too, but we're working on a solution. In fact, we already have one and it's sitting in main if you really need it. And what that looks like is this. You can create an Interchange editor blueprint pipeline. And then you can't run that at runtime, but you get all your cool toys, right? So solved problem, get it in main if you need it. So the asset registry, different from metadata. Basically, it builds a database side by side to our UAsset. So this means that we can access this metadata without loading the asset. And rather than saving this data directly on the asset, we formulate rules, and then it saves asynchronously into this database, okay? Let's look at a simple case study back to our RPG thing. You can see all this. That's all asset registry data. What's cool is it's searchable in the toolbar. That in itself is quite useful, I would say. because when you get a lot of assets, you need a way to deal with them. And adding them is easy. In C++, I can just add that, and it becomes data in that database. In this example, it would be crazy to load every asset just to check progress or if they have data. So I'm using the asset registry instead. Make sense? Because imagine going through every asset just to put in this Kanban. It'd be crazy. Here, you can see though, my thing's not working. I have metadata set on my assets, but it's not going here. Why? Because it's not in the asset registry. I'm just trying to prove that they're different data sources. And what's really cool that a lot of people don't know about that I'm excited to talk about is you can copy them over though. You can sort of duplicate that and have it update. So not many people know, but in the asset manager, you can put in metadata tags for the asset registry, put in the tag name there, and it will now appear in the asset registry for searching, for tools dev, whatever. So that's really powerful because now we can tag assets like textures and have them sort of have information that we might want to tool on top of. So now, if I write my own name, they're all the things I'm meant to be working on. In this Kanban example, I just want to quickly go over, this is how you use the asset registry. I'm just loading all the asset data around that folder, and then I'm just checking if it has that tag. Done, easy. So cool use cases. Well, metadata coming in, we could actually activate stuff. Think about the PCG example, which I haven't built but would like to. That could be really useful for if you saw Chris's talk, you do a lot of things with tags like rotate or align. Well, we could actually set that potentially in our DCC and have that come over. So there's a lot of cool implementations, maybe a specific material, anything, right? All right, just because you could use Interchange for validation, should you? Because this is the first thing, when I thought about Interchange, I'm like, great, I can build validation into that. Awesome, I can let people know they're doing something wrong early. Well, yeah, but we have a whole framework around asset validation. So, now I'm less confident. The Asset Validator plugin is a really powerful tool. It can work with Blueprint or C++. You can run it on pre-submit, save, from the command line or CI/CD. Let's go ahead and make a simple one. I need to make a new editor utility. Its parent's going to be a validator asset base. And once I've done that, I can override 3 different functions. I'm going to skip through this a little bit just because we're running out of time. But essentially what I'm going to end up with is I can set different use cases. So am I saving or am I committing to source control? And here I'm just going to do a simple check. If the base color, if it's named base color, then I can validate it. Over here, I'm going to actually validate it. Now we've got 3 seconds, valid, invalid, or not validated. Not validated in this case means we're going to skip it for some reason. Let's turbo program. So I've got asset warning, asset pass, asset failed. That's a way to ship information to our log. And I need to restart the editor. So when you make a validator, it won't register until you restart. And you'll be like, why doesn't it work? Let's go ahead and run that. So we can right click and we get an error message. So that's really useful. We can also run them on save by ticking that. Maybe too aggressive for your team, see if you like it. Pre-submit is what I recommend. So we have validation. Do we run it in Interchange? Do we duplicate logic? Well, no, what I would say is that a good approach to this, because I get asked about it, is on post-factory, run the asset validator. Don't clone your logic. Now, problem with that is it's only going to be available in 5.5 due to previously mentioned editor-only pipelines, okay? Solved problem. Interchange also has its own test plan, so we can import an asset, run your scripts, and then run a bunch of commands to see if it worked. So even validation is built into this framework, which is super cool. Now, if you want to add extra checks, you do need to do that in C++, but what's there is pretty good. The asset reference restriction, this is what we're going to end on today for this talk. This is an implementation of the asset validation tool, and it's really powerful with modern workflows that are happening. It solves a lot of issues that has kept me up at night as a technical director, and I can't believe we exist in a world where we didn't have it. But first, let's talk about the plugin reference viewer. It's a new plugin view, and it shows you all how your plugins connect in terms of dependency. And so now you can show all the artists in your team the way they should reference in order to not create dependency issues. Now, this is becoming more common because of things like the game play framework extension plugins, right? This is an example of Lyra, and you can see that it goes blah, 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 and like that's great because everything's modular, but also we need to manage this modularity, okay? And that's going to add a bit of overhead. And so graphs are cool for you to look at. In my experience, no one looks at your graphs. It doesn't matter how cool they are, they're not going to look at them. And it's not the artist's fault. There's so many places you can make a mistake, right? DLC content, studio plugins, developers folders, the list goes on, right? It's just an easy thing to do. So the asset reference restrictions solves this issue. It's going to protect us from ourselves. To explain it, I've got a simple setup. I've got 2 content plugins. I've got a mesh in plugin A referencing a material on plugin B, and I've got a mesh in plugin B that references a material on plugin A. Blech. And I've got this is how I've set up the plugin, right? So I've set up a dependency in one of my content plugins. So so what's going on here, as you can see, is that plugin B can reference plugin A. Plugin A should not be referencing plugin B. If they reference each other, they may as well be the same plugin, right? There's no need for them to be different. So I turn on the plugin. It's as easy as this. I restart the editor, because it's an implementation of the validation framework, which we know we need to restart. I run it, and it's going to tell me that I messed up. This is what we want. Final point before I conclude. This actually is pretty useful when you're dealing with plugins. It's a little bit of a divergence, but I thought I'd throw it in there. You can essentially add in plugin directories to grab from outside of the plugins folder in your U project or your engine folder, right? That can be useful if you've got studio plugins on a Perforce or something that you want to pull from. Now, this also has downsides. I don't know if there's any foolproof way to actually deal with studio plugins. I think UGS is a great option, but maybe that's too much infrastructure for your team. Pros and cons. I just wanted to bring this one up because not too many people know about it. In fact, a client only showed me this a little while ago, and I thought, that could be useful to folks. I'll throw it in the presentation. So just one more little thing that might help. With that, look how much stuff we covered. I know it was a lot, but hopefully you were thinking about how this might make your days better as you use the editor. You don't need to dive into all this stuff at once. You can start implementing it slowly, get validation in, start working on things like that. Maybe you've got a pipeline with Interchange in mind that you can learn. You're not going to learn all of Interchange overnight. You're not going to start editing nodes. It's pretty complex, as you saw. But you can start using the post-factory stuff today, and you'll get a lot of value out of that, right? That's really cool. With that, I wanted to say thank you for coming to the session. My email is there because I love seeing people's tools in their project. I love seeing people's widgets that they make, different ways that they're tooling to make life easier. This is my favorite thing to see, honestly. I'm like, oh, your project's good. Oh, what'd you do there? That's so if you've got any examples, please send them to me. Maybe we can follow this up with a collection of all the amazing things people are doing to give people inspirations. Because what I want to say is the tools are there, right? Find your use cases because you can really empower your team with this stuff without too much work. Thank you very much.